Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Fletcher. We're going to spend some time today talking about flower processing and flower care and handling in general. Of course, to understand those ideas, you have to go back and recall some of your biology and botany so that you remember how plants actually work in the world. So, the first thing to know is that there is a chain of distribution in every industry, and this is ours in floral design. It's important that correct care and handling is taking place at every step of the chain because our customer is the one who eventually will benefit from everyone doing their part. So, our growers typically are in California, South America, and Holland. And from the farm or the greenhouses, the product is trucked to airports and then flown to the San Francisco airport. That's the closest international airport to us, and so that's where our flowers arrive. They're then trucked to Sacramento, and we typically buy all of our flowers from Flora Fresh Inc. because that is our closest wholesaler in Sacramento. So, again, it has to do with getting our flowers as fast as possible so we can get them to the customer when they have very little age on them. At that point, flowers are trucked to Shingle Springs. We get orders Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, or we can, of course, go to Sacramento and pick up. We are a retailer here at the high school. We process flowers, we design, and then we sell to consumers or customers. And then, of course, the consumer is the last person in the chain. And if we educate our consumer, then those flowers will last even longer. So, part of our job is to tell the buyer or the consumer what to do with the arrangements once we deliver them. Proper care and handling leads to longer vase life. So, every flower has a set vase life biologically. Some last longer than others in nature and when we design with them, but we want to optimize that time for our customer. So flowers arrive boxed or in buckets with water at school, and typically these days boxed. So those are dry and they need to be processed as soon as possible, ideally on the same day that we receive them. We save our boxes for deliveries of our arrangements, or we give them back to the wholesaler to be recycled, used again. Holes in the end allow for gradual temperature changes after cold flights. So, a lot of my students think that these are handles and they can be used for that. But the actual purpose is when flowers have been very cold, up high up in altitude on an airplane, and then they land at the wholesaler or the San Francisco flower market, then they need to gradually be brought to room temperature. And so you punch out the end here, see this perforated flap, and that allows the air to go into the box and gradually warm them up so that they don't shatter in the process and cause a lot of cell damage. So remember that flowering plants reproduce through sexual reproduction, meaning there's a male and a female sex cell. And you can watch this short video if you want to remember how that happens. Sexual reproduction in flowering plants results in seeds, and we germinate the seed in order to pass on genetics and create a new plant. But not all plants reproduce sexually. Not all plants are flowering plants or have seeds. And so I wanted to talk to you about spores because you may see some on the ferns that you're going to receive. So spores are on the back of the fern and they're completely normal. They hold genetic information and they release that information to reproduce a new fern. You can watch this little video if you would like to see a really cool time lapse of a fern. A little review about the xylem and the phloem, which are cells that are found in the stem of the plant, and it's like a freeway system. The phloem flows downward for the most part, and the xylem pulls water upward. And so this matters to us because when we put our stems into water, like if this was a bucket of water and not the soil where these potatoes are, then whatever is in our water is going to be pulled up the xylem to the leaves and to the flowers up on top of the plant, which is what we're trying to use to design with. So that's a positive thing. It's pulling water up. But if we have bacteria in our bucket down here, it will pull the bacteria up as well. And then that will make our leaves and flowers last for less time. And so when we know the science behind what's happening in the water and the stems, then we can work to improve that. So here's what we do with our water quality. We think about all these factors. First of all, we fill a clean bucket with cold water up to a line, 1 gallon. We have a line marked in our bucket. At home, make sure there's no soap residue in your bucket. Bleach is a better way to clean, but again, just make sure that you have washed it all out. Fluoride harms plants. If you live in El Dorado County, our public water system does not use fluoride. But if you ever move anywhere else and you're working with flowers, you should find out if you have fluoride in your water and maybe use bottled water instead. We add 1 full scoop of plant preservative. It's an agent that we buy from our floral wholesaler, and it contains wetting agents that help with water absorption, a biocide to kill bacteria and fungi, sugar to maintain energy in plants, and an acidifier which lowers the pH of the water to optimal levels. We add 1 chlorine tablet. It's a very small tablet, and it prevents bacterial growth and makes the flowers last longer. If you're at home, floral preservative is the best option, but if you don't have that, scientifically proven that lemon lime soda is the next best option. So if you can get a hold of that, that's a good way to keep your flowers alive longer. So this would be in our lab. So here's the line I told you about in the bottom of our bucket. So it's really simple. You just fill that bucket up with cold water to that line. You put in 1 scoop of the floral preservative and you put in 1 chlorine tablet. And of course, this is a clean bucket. And then we're ready to plant prep. And plant prep is all about bacteria. We are trying to reduce our bacteria count around all of our flowers to make them last longer. So we use clean tools, remove all rubber bands and cellophane from the flower packages that come, remove leaves below the water line, cut 1 inch or less off the bottom of stems. This opens cells to allow water uptake, and longer stems are worth more. There are more options for a longer stemmed flower. You can make more different designs out of a longer stem. So that's why we only want to cut 1 inch or less. The big rule is no leaves below the water line because leaves are notoriously full of bacteria. And so once those drop into the water, that bacteria is in the water, and as we saw, it'll be drawn up the xylem to the flower, and your whole arrangement will last for a shorter period of time. So here's what the flowers look like when they come to us boxed. These are roses that are protected by this cardboard and stapled closed. You can see the rubber bands here on the bottom of each of these bunches. We don't want the rubber band to go under the water line because it's full of bacteria, and we don't want any of this plastic to be below the water line. So be sure that you remove or strip the leaves off the bottom of your stems. You can just take your fingers here and run your fingers down the stem and take all of those leaves off. You leave on the leaves on the top because those are like a pump. They're drawing water up the stem, and we do want our flower to live, and it needs water to do so. So don't take absolutely every leaf off, just the bottom ones that would be below the water line. This is how you would make your cut. It can be a straight across cut at this point, 1 inch or less off the bottom of the stems. Our organization at school, our method is that we put like flower types and like colors together in buckets. And the reason is, let's say that you're designing and you need these pink tulips here on the bottom, but you don't need these yellow tulips yet. You're not ready in your design to use those. And so if everything is mixed together, everything comes out of the cold and into the warm air every time you pull a bucket. So if you keep them separate, you can keep almost everything in the cooler until you need it. Ethylene is our enemy. We're going to talk about ethylene for a second. Ethylene is a naturally occurring hormone in plants, so it's nothing bad for us. And in fact, it's nothing bad for the plant, except that we're trying to do this unnatural thing, which is to make flowers last a long time off of the plant. So here's what ethylene does. In nature, it causes plants to mature and fruit to ripen. So this is why a whole tree flowers at once. Ripening fruit releases even more ethanols or ethylene. Let me fix that. Not ethanol. So this is why you may have heard that phrase, one bad apple spoils the bunch, because if one fruit is ripening, it's giving off more and more ethylene, and that causes everything around it to ripen. And this is how all of the fruit on a plant generally is ready at the same time. But ethylene is negative for flowers because it causes them to open too fast and die too soon. So we need to eliminate its sources, and its sources are here on the bottom. Things like exhaust, cigarette smoke, ripening food, and flowers. So what this means is we want no dead or decaying flowers in the bucket or the cooler. Throw them out. And I have a little time-lapse video for you if you want to watch it later. And around the 1 minute mark, that is when we would get rid of that particular flower. So optimal storage anywhere is about 35 degrees for most flowers. You want it dark and cool, no direct sunlight, no direct moving air on flowers and leaves, because that makes the plants lose their water faster and dry out faster. So it's really not positive to put your flowers right next to a fan. For example, in this picture of the cooler we have, the flowers that are right next to this cooling system are going to dry out much faster than those that are farther away from it. Our cooler is, of course, clean and disinfected, and the plants do not touch anything in the cooler, like the racks, the walls, or the floors, because bacteria is everywhere. Again, decrease your ethylene, not your ethanol. I must have had cars on the brain when I was making this. So decrease your ethylene whenever possible. All right, to review, our chain of distribution is the grower, goes to the shipper, goes to the wholesaler, goes to another shipper, goes to the retailer, that's us, and then goes to the consumer. So we can control our portion of this through water quality, plant care and handling, storage, and then I'll add one more here later, and that is education of the consumer. If we can teach our consumer how to store their arrangements well, they'll last even longer. All right, so since we can, I'm going to do some practice plant identification. This is a sneak peek of what is in our lab today that you'll be picking up for hands-on labs. So we have carnations. Carnations are a mass flower, meaning their purpose in arrangements is usually for color or volume. As you can see, they come in many different colors and also variegated options. Variegated means 2 colors within one plant. Mini carnations are also mass flowers, and they're there for color and volume. I'm not sure where that picture went. Pom-pom buttons are mass flowers, so they're for color and volume. This particular color, the green one up here, is called Kermit, like Kermit the Frog, very appropriate. But they come in just about every color you can think of. Pom-pom cushions, again, come in just about every color. We have white this week. They're also mass flowers, and they're there for color and volume. Misty is a filler flower. It's used to do what its name says, to fill spaces and to soften the edges of designs. So we have it in both white and blue this week. Cresspedia is a mass flower. So it's used for color and volume, and of course it has an interesting shape and texture, and so that's why a lot of designers like this one. Here's a standard rose, and roses are sold by the stem length. So a standard rose means it's a single rose head, a single bloom on a stem. but this is a 50 centimeter length stem. So this is called a 50 centimeter rose, and that's the typical size that we buy in our program. A rose is called a form flower, which means it is a focal point, it's attention getting, it has a very specific shape to it. But if you had some other flower that was very special in the design, like a lily or a sunflower that was overpowering the rose, or you were using a lot of roses, it could also become a mass flower instead of a form flower. It depends on how it's being used. Here's the leatherleaf fern I was talking to you about. That's what the spores will look like on the back. It just depends on where they come from and the time of year where they're harvested as to whether or not they will have spores. This is considered a green, which means it is a background or a foundation, and it can also be used to create a line because it has these very clear points on it. Whether you use this entire leaf or you cut off the lateral leaves on the side, and use those in your arrangement. This is Italian ruscus. It's also a green, so it's used for background and foundation, but it is long. As you can see, these stems are long, so it can also be used to create a line. This is called Sweet William, and it's from the Dianthus family. This is also a mass flower for color and volume and mass. All right, so at home, you need to follow the steps to care for and store your flowers now, today, and between each class period this week. Good luck, and I'll see you in class.